Afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to speak here this afternoon. So, as Pat said, I work as part of the emission statistics team in the EPA. And today I'm just going to bring you through our air pollutant inventory from 1990 to 2021, and the graphs include our projections out to 2030, so I can talk about compliance. So just an overview of what I'm going to cover today. I'm going to talk to you about how we compile the inventory, the guidelines and methodologies, the data sources we use, the reporting obligations and timelines, some of the key categories in our 2021 inventory, which is the submission for 2023, so that's our latest published inventory. We're working on finalising the 2022 figures at the moment. I'm going to talk to you about compliance and the emission reduction commitments and the time series trends, and projections out to 2030. And then I just have a couple of slides on residential particulate matter emissions and the impact that fuel switching has had on those. So to begin with, the team compiles the air pollutant inventory under the UN Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution and its protocols, and we also report under the National Emission Reduction Commitments Directive. The methodologies we use are very clearly outlined in the EMEP EEA Air Pollutant Emission Inventory Guidebook. The current version of the guidebook that we're using is 2019, so it's the 2019 emission factors and methodologies that are included in our current inventory. And actually, just a few weeks ago, the Task Force for Emission Inventories and Projections released the 2023 version of the guidebook, so the team will be busy reviewing that for updated emission factors and methodologies to include in later iterations of the inventory. So just to briefly speak about where we get the data, we couldn't put the inventory together without our key data providers. This isn't an exhaustive list, but it's some of our main providers. So Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland gives energy stats, Teagasc gives us agricultural data, National Farm Survey. Our own internal Office of Environmental Enforcement, the Emissions Trading Team, Emissions Registry, and the Waste Statistics Team provide a lot of activity data for our inventories. The outputs of research projects, the EPA research projects helps us to refine our inventory, constantly improving methodologies and emission factors. Gas Networks Ireland give us information on fugitive emissions and also on gas composition. Department of Agriculture give us animal movements and fertiliser sales. Marine Institute give us offshore discharges and emissions, and the Central Statistics Office give us economic and trade data, and also some livestock data and crop data. So we have a huge influx of activity data that goes into our inventory production. And then moving on to what we actually report. So under the ClearTap, I just divided them into main pollutants here: particulate matter, heavy metals, we have priority and initial, and we have the persistent organic pollutants. And then under the National Emission Reduction Commitments Directive, we have the 5 pollutants that have reduction commitments for 2020 and 2030. So they're nitrous oxides, sulfur dioxide, NMVOC, ammonia, and particulate matter 2.5. So in addition to this reporting, we have national gridded data every 4 years from 2017, large point source emissions data every 4 years, and our inventory is reported every year on the 15th of February. That's a data submission. Our informative inventory report is submitted in March of 2023 is our latest informative inventory report, and our projections are also due in March every 2 years, and 2023 was a mandatory reporting year. So our inventories, all inventories should be produced using these principles, and essentially the transparency, that's where the informative inventory report comes in. That's where you can get all the information on the methods we use and the assumptions, the activity data, emission factors. They have to be accurate, consistent, comparable, so they have to be comparable, produced in a way that they can be compared to all member states, and they have to be complete, cover all sources and include all gases. So this is a big part of producing the inventory for the team. So this table I just included, there's a lot of detail in it, but just to show you the key categories in 2021 and what key categories are essentially, they're prioritised in the inventory because they have a significant influence on the national total. So They're the categories whose combined contribution to the national total emission is greater than 80%. So the easiest one to explain here is for sulfur dioxide. There's two subcategories there: residential combustion and public and electricity generation. So those combined are 84% of our national inventory. So they're the two key categories for sulfur dioxide. And you can see what this is to show, really, I suppose. It's colour-coded. Energy is yellow, industrial processes and product use is orange, agriculture is green, and waste is purple, but there are no key categories for waste in the main pollutants. So you can see here energy and agriculture. Energy includes the transport, residential combustion and electricity generation sectors. So these are the key categories within the inventory, and they're the prioritised areas. So some of the key messages from our report in 2023. So Ireland exceeded its emission reduction commitment for ammonia in 2020 and in 2021, and as a result, Ireland received a letter of formal notice from the EU Commission. Emissions of non-methane volatile organic compounds, we used a flexibility mechanism to meet the 2021 emission reduction commitment, which is allowed in the NEC directive. We're compliant with our ERC, our emission reduction commitment, for nitrogen oxides and fine particulate matter. But these are pollutants that we have to keep an eye on, because we're going to need much deeper cuts in these pollutants to meet our emission reduction commitment for 2030. Sulfur dioxide emissions, they continue to be well below the ERC, and that was despite an increase in 2021, where we saw an increase in coal and fuel oil in electricity generation. So that resulted in an increase in emissions. But despite this, we're achieving our emission reduction commitments. So what are these emission reduction commitments? They're set out here, and they're set as a percentage reduction on 2005 emission levels. So in addition to the 2020 and 2030 emission reduction commitments, the emissions in 2025 have to follow a linear reduction trajectory between the 2020 and 2030 emission reduction commitments. So that's an additional requirement. So I'm just going to bring you through the main pollutants very quickly. Just to look at sulfur dioxide, as I stated, the black line here in this graph is the emission reduction commitment, and there's a linear pathway between 2020 and 2030. We're achieving compliance for 2020 and 2021 so far. They're the figures that we have, and we're projecting that we will achieve compliance in 2030 quite comfortably. The nitrogen oxides, so the main source of nitrogen oxides emissions are the use of synthetic and organic fertilizer in agriculture sector, fossil fuel combustion in power generation, and also transport fuel use. So here you can see we are meeting our 2020 ERC in 2020 and 2021. So that was a 49% reduction on the 2005 level, and we actually have a 53.8% reduction in 2021. And we're on track to meet our 2030 ERC. Ammonia, we've already discussed this. The agriculture sector accounts for virtually all the ammonia emissions. We were 3% above our 2005 levels in 2020, and we were 3.8% above our 2005 levels in 2021. So we were non-compliant with the ERC, and as a result, the European Commission in January 2023 served Ireland with an infringement notice. Our projections show that we're on track for 2030 for the reduction of -5% compared to 2005, but this is going to require significant policy levers to achieve these reductions. Next up, we have NMVOC. So these are emitted from solvents, lots of different paints, glues, cleaning agents, that type of thing, but also from the food and beverages industry, spirit production. And Ireland actually applied an adjustment to achieve compliance, and this is allowed under Article 5 of the NEC directive. With this flexibility in play, we had a 32.5% decrease in emissions from 2005 to 2021, which brought Ireland into compliance with their ERC. So that ERC for 2020 is a 25% reduction. And we're also on track to meet our 2030 ERC of -32% compared to 2005. And finally, I'm coming to PM 2.5, which has been much talked about today. This graph shows the emissions, the time series from 1990 to 2030 for all sectors. And you can see here the dominant sector is residential and commercial, and this is fuel combustion in residential and commercial. So it's the big contributor to PM 2.5 emissions. You can see we have a reduction across the time series. We were 32.7% below the 2005 levels in 2021. So we're in compliance with the 2020 emission reduction commitment, and we're on track to meet the 2030 ERC, which is minus 41%, but with a very small margin, as you can see in this graph. So this is again one to watch. And while I note that there is compliance with the ERCs, the localised air quality issues continue and are of great concern, as has been discussed here today. I just included a couple of slides on the residential sector. So this shows the emissions by fuel type. So here you can see in the early and mid-90s, coal and peat had a huge contribution to the PM 2.5 residential emissions. And this has decreased. We actually have a 68% decrease between 1990 and 2021. And this is as a result of fuel switching. So we have 68% reduction in emissions because people are moving away from coal and peat, the solid fuels, and they're switching over to natural gas and kerosene predominantly. So this graph shows the energy use. And what this actually shows is our energy usage didn't decrease in the residential sector, it increased by 19%. But because we switched from coal and peat, you can see the red and blue parts of the bars here in the early 90s, early mid-90s, to kerosene and natural gas, we achieved emissions reduction. So I just kind of wanted to end on a slightly positive note. We can achieve emissions reductions if we continue with this fuel switching and moving to more sustainable methods of residential heating, retrofitting. So I just wanted to show overall the trend can be positive. But again, it's one that we have to keep an eye on from local air quality point of view and the implications for our health. If you want further information on any of this, our annual reports, we produce a summary report on our air pollutant emissions on our website. And if you want really detailed information on it, the informative inventory report is also up on our website. And this is what is a huge part of the transparency of our inventory. You can see all of our emission factors, methodologies, and assumptions in that document. And if there are any follow-up questions, please contact the team and one of us will follow up with you. Okay, thanks very much.